All right. This is Brenda Ladun with Moving On. It's your podcast to talk about just a variety of things. And we were out west. Bill and I, my husband and I, went out west last year, and it was absolutely amazing. And what was most amazing, the wildlife, the bison, the buffalo. Sometimes there's a little bit of a debate over, what you call the bison or the buffalo. Well, joining me today is Daniel Kinka. All right, I want to thank Daniel Kinka coming to us from the American Prairie, and you're the director of rewilding.
That's
Um,
correct.
the first of all, I posted bison or buffalo, I'll just say, on social media, and people got into an argument. So tell us, what is the proper name for these beautiful animals?
Either. They're the same thing. A rose by any other name would smell as sweet. Bison is a scientific term.
Okay.
Technically speaking, buffalo are what exist in Africa and Asia. We don't have any buffalo in North America.
Mhm.
But when the Europeans first came to the North American continent, they recognized the bison as something closest to the buffalo that they knew. They basically taught that English word, that French word, and then that English word to the indigenous peoples of the Americas who learned them as buffalo. And so the terms are used synonymously today. American bison or American buffalo serves the same purpose unless you're at a scientific conference.
We were mesmerized by these animals. They're beautiful, they're enormous, they're fascinating. But we also noticed people getting way too close, like way too close. Um, can you give us a little bit of direction on how close is too close?
hmm So I think you were in the national parks, and the
Right.
park's messaging is 100 feet or about 30 meters is about as close as you want to be to a bison. If you're closer than that, you want to move away. If
Uh-huh.
you're in the road or you're in a vehicle and they're closer than that to the vehicle, they recommend you stay in your vehicle. At American Prairie, we're a little bit more conservative than that. We just say, as a rule of thumb, people should stay about 100 yards away from a bison. Partly because people have a general sense of what 100 yards is. You can also kind of stand with your hand out at an arm's length, and if your thumb covers up the animal, you're fine. If you can see the animal around your thumb, you're probably too close. That said, despite the videos that you see on social media and stuff that comes out of the national parks, these are not seek and destroy animals. The bison just want to be left alone like most wildlife do. They have a bubble, just like you probably have a bubble. And if there's something, a person or something else inside of it, they get uncomfortable. You can learn to read bison body language just like another animal. And once you know that, you know to leave them alone, give them space, the same way you would ask from them or any other animal.
Well, tell me what American Prairie does.
Yeah, American Prairie exists as a conservation, non-governmental organization that operates in central Montana. And our goal is to create one of the largest natural wildlife refuges in the lower 48. 3.2 million acres, 5,000 square miles set aside explicitly for public access and for wildlife recovery, for ecological recovery, preserving one of the most imperiled biomes on the planet, the temperate grasslands. What that means is that today, this is true today, and increasingly in the future, the American public, the global public, has one place, at least one place on Earth they can go and see big thundering herds of bison, but also things like bighorn sheep and pronghorn antelope and sage grouse, and maybe someday wolves and grizzly bears, an actual representation of what existed for 10,000 years in the Great Plains of North America, but has been largely lost in the last 100 or so years.
Yeah. How did you get involved? Did you always love animals?
Yeah. I started my career as an academic in psychology, actually, and then realized that I loved being a scientist, but that was not a lifestyle that I liked. It was too much time indoors. Thanks to my dad and my mom, we always spent a lot of time outside growing up in national parks looking at wildlife, and I realized after my master's that that's where I wanted to be, even as an academic, even as a dork. So I got my PhD in ecology, and I just got very lucky to be in the right place at the right time on the way out to accept a job at American Prairie, and I've been here for 8.5 years, doing a dream job.
Ah, well, how many did you say? How many bison do you have there?
There's just under 1,000 bison at American Prairie right now, something like 950 or something like that.
And you're hoping to grow that?
Yes, we want to see. I mean, generally speaking, American Prairie it would like to see more bison in more places, right? As the nation's mammal, as something that can be enjoyed by the general public, consumptively and non-consumptively, but also in my world, ecologically. Bison are not just this giant the largest mammal in North America, this charismatic species, our national mammal, but they are an ecosystem engineer, a keystone species, which means the more places where there are bison in meaningful numbers, the better the ecosystem is doing, the stronger the biodiversity, the more different types of species and processes are supported on those grasslands. So a bison's not just a bison. That would be enough in and of itself. They're an extraordinary animal, but everywhere you see bison, and not a bison, but a bison herd, they are doing something for the grasslands. That means there's more birds, there's more mammals, there's more reptiles, amphibians, and pollinators out there in the same pastures, and more, better, healthier, diverse grasslands as well. That's what the bison bring with them when you restore them.
Wow. Now, the bison started out, they were a crawl across the country, I guess, way back when. I'm listening to a lot of history on tape books, and I was kind of surprised. So, bison, they were almost completely wiped out, weren't they?
That's correct. We came just shockingly close to losing that animal entirely from the face of the earth, or at least from the lower 48, the plains bison anyways. They were hunted basically to exhaustion and driven into smaller and smaller populations. Later, people found uses for them for making belts and machine belts in factories. They were hunted for sport in addition to meat and in addition to their hides. And then at some point, they were actually kind of brought into the Indian Wars and were, as a tactic of war, the U.S. government was eradicating bison to subjugate the indigenous peoples of the plains. All of those things combined lead to a world where we almost lost the bison entirely from the lower 48. I mean, we're talking 20 or something animals left in what is today Yellowstone National Park, and many of the bison that exist today are the descendants of those animals in a very small area. So, I mean, this is a conservation success story in many ways. We came very, very close to losing this animal. And today, there's hundreds of thousands of bison throughout the continent, but almost all of them are behind a fence. We have almost no wild bison. So the story of bison today is not a story of extinction or the threat of extinction. We almost certainly will not lose bison at this point, thanks to conservationists and tribal organizers and activities that have taken place for the better part of 100 years. The bison are safe, but ecologically, what I just described, they are extinct. We do not have functional bison populations anywhere in the continent. You could make a case for the Henry Mountains in Utah or Yellowstone National Park, but with very few exceptions, debatable exceptions, bison are extinct ecologically. So yes, you can go see them in Yellowstone today. Yes, you can come see them at American Prairie today. But there's almost nowhere you can go in North America and see bison acting as an ecosystem engineer, creating the habitat in the grasslands that is required for the full complement of biodiversity, the full complement of birds and mammals and amphibians and pollinators that are supposed to call that place home.
Okay, so explain for people who might not understand, how do the bison actually help the birds and the rest of the ecosystem?
Absolutely. So this is, bear with me. This is the stuff that I love, and I'm sure some of your listeners do too, but it gets a little technical, right? So like we're leaving biology and we're moving into ecology, right? How species and ecosystems interact. That's where you get this keystone species stuff. So what does a bison do that makes it special, makes it different from like an elk or some other grazing species, right? Bison are actually an ecosystem engineer many times over. They do a lot of different stuff that increases the habitat's capacity for biodiversity. One of those things is wallowing, taking dust baths, right?
Yeah.
Bison will wallow and they'll take dust baths in the same place over and over again, and it creates these little depressions, these little kind of pock marks, these divots on the landscape. In the rainy seasons, those will fill with water, and they can actually like grow trees where you wouldn't actually grow trees otherwise on the prairie. They become little breeding habitats for invertebrates and some amphibians as well. So you now have these critical breeding spots for plants and animals that just don't exist if you don't have bison on the landscape. Cattle don't do this. You can't teach a cow to take a dust bath. The bison do it on their own. But the main reason that we think of bison as an ecosystem engineer, as a keystone species, is the way they graze. So think about a grassland, right? And you don't have to know the biology. You don't have to be able to name the species, dozens of hundreds of plants that grow on the prairie, right? But think about it structurally. So if you had a lawn, right? This is typically how we've managed our grasslands for cattle production, historically anyways. You want to take about as much of that grass off as you can without damaging the habitat. So we kind of operated under this principle of take half, leave half. So half of all the grass that gets grown every year is grazed by cattle or livestock, and the other half is left for wildlife and biodiversity. Setting aside whether or not that is sustainable, what that yields is one even lawn across the entirety of the Great Plains, right? Everything is covered by cattle nowadays, right? And so under this historical grazing practices of cattle, you have one height of grass, right? It looks like a lawn, basically, like a golf course or something like that. There's just one height. Now, that's fine if you're a grassland bird that likes to make its nest in a spot that is grazed at a medium height. But if you're a grassland bird that needs a prairie dog town or an old burn area to nest on bare ground and to hide in that like scorched earth or that brown soil from that's charred or those darkened grasses or cactuses from the burn,
Mhm.
you've got nowhere to lay your eggs. Likewise, there's another side of that spectrum. You might be a grassland bird that requires ungrazed grass, maybe for years at a time, big, tall, thick grassland cover to hide in, right? Because that's your life strategy. You won't find that on the grassland plains today. And of course, I'm talking about two scenarios when in actuality, it's a continuum, right?
Right.
So bison, if left to their own devices, not left behind a fence, right? If left to their own devices and in combination with things like prairie dogs and wildfire, make that grassland constantly this shifting quilt, this shifting mosaic of structural heights, right? One patch might be grazed in one year, forgotten about for the next 10, burned the year after that, and that's changing and dynamic across the entirety of the Great Plains. What that means is if you're bird X and you need bare ground, you will find it. If you're bird Y and you need ungrazed grass, you will find that. If you're bird Z and you like that, like take half, leave half, like Goldilocks grass, you'll find that too. But we
Okay.
didn't leave any of that the way we graze cattle historically. There's cattle ranchers now that are trying to basically mimic what bison do for healthier grasslands, and that's meaningful. But historically, that's not the way we've managed it. Bison do it for free, but only if they're allowed to be bison. That's what we mean as ecologists, as biologists, when we say this species is not just a beautiful, charismatic animal, but it's literally making the plains. It is making the biodiversity, the bioabundance that we've lost and some of us are trying to convince people is achievable again, something that we can bring back for the benefit of everyone.
So is it? Is it achievable? Are you doing it?
We're doing it every day at American Prairie, and not just us. There's a number of different actors that are doing something similar. The tribes, many different tribes across the plains have been doing bison restoration, or what sometimes gets called rematriation of bison across the plains for a long time. So it's longer than I've been alive, right? So I mean, so you've got tribal initiatives that have been putting bison hooves back in more places across the plains, oftentimes on Indian reservations, but not exclusively.
Right.
You've also got national wildlife refuges in addition to the parks that are bringing back bison in certain places. And then you've got private actors like American Prairie that are doing the same thing. This doesn't change the fact that while there's more bison in more places, we still don't have bison as like a true wildlife species almost anywhere in the continent. That's the next barrier that we need to achieve as conservationists, as restorationists, as rewilders, to be able to say we have succeeded in bringing the bison back. But for today, and for the last 5 or 6 decades, there's been people hard at work bringing back bison and putting them in more places.
Yeah, speaking of that, I remember going to one of the museums out west and finding out the bison were almost completely wiped out. And there was a rancher's wife that said, "Hey, we got to do something about this." And, being a woman, I was like, okay, go, that she helped bring back some of the bison. But you're saying, of course, the tribal nations have also worked as well. But how do you have them across the plains with the cars and the people and the cities that pop up? I mean, how do you see that? Like, we here have a lot of coyotes, and they live in and around the city. They exist. How do you do that with bison with the way humans live?
Yeah, well, taking off my American Prairie hat, because that's not what we do at American Prairie. We have a mission. We're bringing back bison at scale in one huge chunk of the grasslands, which is
Yeah.
largely empty, right? Most of your listeners would recognize it as like the middle of nowhere. There's plenty of people that live there and have for a long time, but it is about as rural as it gets, right?
Okay.
That works in one way. And American Prairie, through private land ownership and public grazing leases, is able to do that without, infringing on anybody's space or stuff, right? With bison. Taking my hat off as American Prairie's director of rewilding and thinking more about like broader coexistence landscapes for wildlife, bison or anything else, I would say that we've been doing this for decades, for centuries. Americans, whether you are indigenous or the descendant of some more recent comer from another place, Europe or somewhere else, you as an American have been living alongside abundant wildlife in a way that many of our European counterparts don't have the luxury of doing, right? People come from overseas and they see squirrels in national parks and they think this is extraordinary, right? To most Americans, this doesn't seem like that big of a deal. Now, I'm not trying to be flippant and
No.
say that like a squirrel is the same thing as a bison. They're not. But we have roadmaps, we have strategies for coexisting with wildlife, whether it's wolves or grizzly bears or bison or wolverines or squirrels and robins and starlings. We're really good at this as a nation in terms of making sure that our wildlife don't get poked so far outside of the fringes that we lose everything entirely, right? We're lucky to be here in a place that is still as wild as it is. Now, it might not seem very wild if you're in Washington, D.C., where I grew up, or New York City, or I don't know. Where are you at right now?
Yeah, Birmingham, Alabama, right?
Birmingham, Alabama probably
Right.
doesn't feel particularly wild, right? And I don't know if Birmingham, Alabama is ever going to be ready to have bison, nor does it need to be for ecologies to function appropriately. But
Right.
along a gradient, particularly in the emptier parts of the continent, there's so much space and increasingly more and more tolerance for wildlife. And that's all that it takes.
Right.
We
Well,
don't have habitat loss. We haven't paved over all of the grasslands or all of the temperate forests or all of the coral reefs, whatever the equivalent is, right? There's places to put wildlife in abundance for the enjoyment of all of us. What's required is tolerance, and increasingly, year on year, that increases. Whether you're in Alabama or you're in Montana, people want wild abundance where they are so that they can enjoy it.
interestingly enough, we did have some bison at Oak Mountain State Park, and this was some years ago. And I
So,
loved driving past. There was a fence, and seeing them, but they have since been deceased, and we don't have any more of them. They are beautiful animals, and was a veterinarian in this area that had a bison. So they're here, but just not in abundance. You mentioned wolves. The wolves, yeah, I'm very fascinated with wolves as well. And it's kind of sad to me that I know in Yellowstone that they had to try to bring the wolves back, and they've had some problems. And when the wolf population died out, and the elk took over, it actually caused the beavers to die out. So that's exactly what you were talking about. There's a balance of nature. People look at wolves as bad, but wolves are a very important part of the ecosystem, I would guess.
absolutely. Wolves are another keystone species like bison. They work differently.
Mhm.
Bison are what we call an ecosystem engineer. Wolves are what we would call like an apex predator, basically. So they're different kinds of keystone species, but they have a similar effect if you kind of zoom out, right? They are balancing ecologies to the extent that they need to be balanced and creating worlds that are ecologies that are healthy, places, habitats that are healthier and more abundant because of their presence. Now, wolves at American Prairie is probably something for the further distant future, right? Like wolves, as you just pointed out, require big, healthy populations of elk. That's kind of what they're supposed to do if you think about it like an ecologist. And right now at American Prairie, we have two small populations of elk and deer and a lot of cattle, right? So there's not a lot for a wolf to do out here right now other than potentially get itself in trouble. In the future, with more elk and more deer and more bison on the landscape, absolutely. We will need wolves back on the landscape, and I think we will have created a tolerance landscape where that is feasible. But that's the next chapter. Today, there are large carnivores that are finding homes out on American prairie, things like grizzly bears, which are making their way back out onto the prairie and finding places to live productively. Grizzly bears, unlike wolves, are not obligate carnivores in the sense that they have to just eat elk or deer or moose or something like that. They're oftentimes happy eating ants and roots and berries. So today, I think there is a world where grizzly bears can find a home, and you don't have to believe me. That's evidence by them walking off of the mountains in western Montana and finding homes out on the prairie. And so even today, even in the absence of large game animal abundance that we're seeking, there is room in the habitat, there's room in the ecology for even some of the largest, potentially most intimidating carnivores, in addition to the herbivores like bison.
Right. At Yellowstone, we saw 20 bears, we saw grizzlies, we saw black bears. It was
Fantastic.
fantastic. But what was really beautiful, and you're talking about the ecosystem and how they work together, is we saw bison, we saw elk, we saw wolves and bears all in the same field. And not one was, hunting the other down, but they were kind of coexisting. I think people have this fear that when I see a wolf, it's just going to kill everything in sight, but that's not necessarily the truth.
No, of course not. I mean,
Yeah.
of course not. They don't. Wolves, like all wild animals, can, pose threats to us or our stuff. But I mean, these you can find examples, but they're few and far between. I would bring the listener and yourself back to that experience that you had in Yellowstone, right? Even a person that I, I don't want to put words in somebody else's mouth, right? But like, you can find a person that is uncomfortable with the idea of sharing space with a wolf, and that same person can visit Lamar Valley and see wolves doing what wolves do alongside elk and bison and grizzly bears and all that other stuff and coyotes, and still find that beautiful and wonderful in something that is underrepresented on the continent today. And they are correct. One of the things that American Prairie is trying to do is bring that back in a place where it is almost entirely unrepresented. A similar scene that you and others would find in Lamar Valley today doesn't exist in the actual grasslands. Yellowstone's a mountaintop, right? It's like a giant volcano thing, and it's awesome. I was just there with my kid and my parents, and I go there as often as I can. But there's nowhere in the grasslands where you can see something similar. And part of what American Prairie is trying to do is bring that back for the benefit of people and, of course, the ecology.
Okay. So how can people help you?
Well, the short and the simple answer that you probably expect is we're happy to accept your donations. If you enjoy what we're doing and you think there should be more of it, you can go to AmericanPrairie.org. It's not hard to find a donate button once you get there. Thank you in advance for your support if you're willing and able to provide it. The next thing that people can do is come visit. If it's within your means and you're geographically close or you're far away and you can, come see American Prairie. It's open today, tomorrow, 365 days a year. We want people to come see what they're missing, basically. You
Mhm.
won't protect what you don't love, and you won't love what you don't experience. So come visit American Prairie and see what it has to offer, even as we are in the process of rebuilding the ecosystem. And
Okay.
then lastly, a plug. Bison, unfortunately, are kind of unique in
Yeah.
the sense that in most places they're considered livestock, not wildlife. But for the sake of wildlife, wildlife belong to all of us. They're a public trust, right? Every wolf, every grasshopper, every monarch butterfly, every squirrel that you see in the park, they are ours, right?
Yeah.
And if you want to live in a world with more of those, any of those things, you are a part owner of that. And whether you know it or not, you have a state wildlife biologist that basically works for you and covers whatever area you care about. They're good, hardworking people. I went to school with a lot of them. Their
Hmm.
hearts are in the right places, but they can't represent your interests as a wildlife stakeholder unless they hear from you. So go to the public meetings, call them, be nice, tell them what you're concerned about, ask them why there's not more bats in your backyard eating the mosquitoes. They'll have an answer for you. You might not like it, but the more they hear from you, the more that they can help. That makes a wilder world in Montana, but also in Alabama and anywhere else your listeners might live. Bison is different because they're not managed as wildlife, they're private livestock, but there are land issues that impact bison. And if your listeners would like to live in a world with more bison in more places, they can get involved in the same public processes, but rather than being around wildlife, they'd be around land management. So either with the state land management agency, wherever you may be, or the Bureau of Land Management is typically the one that's invoked at the federal level.
Okay, well, that sounds great. I feel like you have educated us all. And we're hearing a lot of these, bison versus human, bear versus human. Stay back and appreciate them. Right.
Absolutely. It's not a versus thing. I mean, like, people and bison co-evolved on this continent, right? Like, in many ways people and bison were made for each other. At least that's what my indigenous neighbors would say, right? I mean, this doesn't have to be us versus nature. I would say we are uniquely qualified as a people to coexist with nature. That's not always easy. It's not always simple. It's not always cheap, but it is doable, and we're good at it. And so I would encourage people to think of themselves in relation with wildlife rather than in opposition to it.
Awesome. All right, Daniel, thank you so much from
My
American
pleasure.
Prairie. We're going to head that way. We're heading to Alaska next year. So we're going to come through and we want to
Come
stop
see
and
us.
see you. All right. All
You're
right.
welcome.
Thank you for all you're doing. It's amazing.